What's up, guys? Polk here, and welcome back for another episode of Poker Hands. And today we're going to be looking at a hero call that was made by my business partner Jake Abdallah, playing a little 25, 50, 100, 200. Let's go ahead and jump into the action.
Not counting calories today. Okay. You open it with the peanut butter whiskey.
Jake with the big slick and the cool shades.
What's that one called again? The screwball.
It's really good. Have you had some before?
Yeah, I have.
It's really good.
825 is the bet with big slick. Over to Pierre.
The first time I had it was like similar to, I guess, your experience where someone just sort of gave it to me and was like, try this.
Here with the 7-5 off, and he's looking to defend here, so a very disguised 7-5 off will not be pushed around. Makes the call. Cards are live. Let's see if Pierre can connect on this.
Our hand begins at 25, 50, 100, 200. And the action folds around to Jake Abdallah in the small blind. By the way, Jake has a mixed game course over at upswingpoker.com that you can check out if you're in the 0.3% of people that are into mixed games. Anyway, Jake does decide to open it up to $825. This is probably a slightly too big size to go here in these straddled pots. Now, I don't know what's correct in double straddled pots as you get shorter, but usually you're going to want to do more like a 2.5, 3x raise size, with the idea being the people in between you and the biggest straddle are probably mainly going to play by re-raising, and you lose less money when you face that re-raise, and I think it's just better to use the smaller size. However, if you're going to raise pretty tight, it can be good to go with a bigger size, slightly less optimal probably, but hard to mess around with, and he does make the ace-king $825 to go. Both of the other smaller straddles and blinds get out of the way, and the action now folds to Pierre in the big blind, who looks down at the 7-5 offsuit facing a over 4x raise. I think this is pretty clearly a fold pre-flop. It's a bit loose to be peeling one off here from the research I've done looking at some ring ranges for about 3 seconds. Anyway, Pierre thinks otherwise. He calls, and let's take a flop. But before we do take a flop, exciting news here from the lodge. We have a meetup game going at 3 p.m. Central Time with myself. Head on down to the lodge today, guys. I'll see you there. And then tomorrow I'm going to be playing on the stream. And Thursday we're going to be doing a feature table from the monthly monster, the $500,000 guaranteed monthly tournament with a $600 buy-in. If any or all of that sounds good to you, then hopefully you're in the Austin area because it's today, so you probably don't have time from anywhere else. Moving on, let's take a flop.
Community flop.
I live in Southern California. Okay.
Yes, indeed. Binks a 7 here. Bottom pair.
Proper LA, little suburban city.
Good shot to Broadway with some overs for Jake, so let's see what happens. Pierre in position. Jake from the small blind pot at 1,800, and he's going for a C bet. Looks to be about 600, 1/3 pot or so. 700 it is.
And I drove the 2.5 hours down to Morongo to play some 2-5.
From where?
Lego Boss.
Quick call from Pierre.
Oh, okay.
The flop comes queen 10-7 with 2 hearts, and Jake decides to go ahead and bet $700 into about $1,800. I think typically on these 2 Broadway boards with 2-tone out there, you're probably going to play a lot of checks. And when you do bet, you're probably going to want to use a bigger size than this small bet. Now, the optimal strategy, of course, has some big bets, some small bets, and some checks, but being that's probably going to be way too complicated for you to employ, I think a more polarized strategy where you use hands like ace-jack or king-jack or hearts or clubs as your bluffs, and then you also work in your value bets like kings for big sizes, maybe bottom set, maybe ace-queen. That strategy is going to be pretty good. However, you can go with a small bet size with a lot of hands because you simply do have a pre-flop advantage on this board. Using that small bet strategy, I like betting Jake's hand here. He has ace-king with a king of hearts. He's going to block a bunch of continues. Having king of hearts certainly good. You want to bet your heart hands more often. And then you're also going to be able to barrel and or check call on some different runouts. This is a hand that gains a lot by betting. Of course, you hit the nuts on a jack. And on these stack sizes, an ace or a king is probably going to be enough to put your money in as well. So you don't mind building this pot because when you hit, you're probably going to be able to play for all of it quite frequently. If the flush gets there, you have some good removal, and you can blow your opponent off of equity if they have a high card hand themselves. Over to Pierre, otherwise known as the 3rd best player from the country of Italy. And now with the bottom pair, there is not much of a player other than to just simply call. You don't want to raise because then if you get re-raised, you're up a creek, and then you definitely have some showdown value. So Pierre should call, and he does, and let's take a turn. By the way, I know that sounds like a huge compliment to be the 3rd best player from Italy, but I've looked at the Hendon mob. It's pretty bleak. Somehow, however, their poker players are still better than their food and their sports preference. Anyway, I'm receiving some breaking news. Apparently, well-known poker YouTuber Doug Polk has been canceled. Oh, fuck. Hello. This is a statement from me, Doug Polk. And these are words that I'm choosing myself, not by my new PR agent after my last fiasco. I love football. It's a great sport, and Italian food is incredible. I also love Game of Thrones and all of the other popular subjects and things that people today enjoy. And they're all great, all of them. Let's take a turn.
And now it's 2-pair
Yeah. So then you know
for
exactly
Pierre. Jake with the heart redraw, king of hearts. Slows down, checks it on over. Pierre will be firing. Don't think he's going to elect for any pot control here. He knows he's got the best hand.
It's great, yeah.
Probably go for about half pot or so, 1,800, something like that.
Makes it 1,000.
A little less.
We'll tell you the chip values in a minute. Jake is going to, let's see what he's going to do.
I think for 1,000 he's going to come along here.
He
Makes
does.
a call.
Lisa will give us the river. Jake looking for a heart.
The turn comes the 5 of hearts, and Jake does decide to bet. This is a spot where out of position when the flush completes, you mainly want to be checking your hands because usually the flush completing is much better for the in-position player. They're going to have more suited hands that can call your pre-flop raise, and they're going to be calling a lot of those hands on the flop. And it's a little more of a polarized spot, so position definitely has more of an advantage. You can bet some hands here, and this hand would every now and then decide to bet. If you're going to bet in this spot, you want to have good hands and bluffs that have a relevant heart, but it's also totally fine to check them. When Jake checks now in Pierre's shoes, you want to bet a lot of hands here. When you do bet, you want to use 1/3 pot. The reason is that this is now a polarized spot. If Jake has a hand like ace, king of clubs, or king, jack of diamonds, or maybe even just jacks with no heart, he's going to get put in a very tough spot where he's probably going to have to fold mainly versus small bets. You can really go after your opponent's range with this small size, and the solver says it's correct. So I'm just using words to explain why I think it is, even though our robot overlords are really just telling us and we don't really get an opinion anymore. Pierre makes the right decision here and bets 1/3 pot. Now over to Jake with the ace, king, king of hearts. This is actually a spot I think a lot of players mess up. You should mainly be check raising when you continue here in this spot. When you have a hand like ace, king, ace, jack, ace, 9, king, jack, any of those hands with a heart, and your lower card is with a heart, typically speaking, those hands like to check raise a very small size on the turn and jam the river. The way you're going to play it, your hands like ace, king, ace, jack will check raise, give up. Your hands like ace, 9, king, jack will check raise and jam. That way you have some bluffs, you have some bluffs that give up, you have some bluffs that follow through, and you're also going to take this line for value with some hands as thin as even aces, which feels bad when they have a flush, but the reality is when you have aces and they have a flush here, you're going to get stacked either way. At least by check raising here, you can get some value from some draws and also potentially stack a bunch of queen X hands that bet the turn. Now, aces is probably going to take a line like betting turn and or just check calling the turn quite often too, but really for your flushes, your non-paired flushes, and some hands like sets, and some hands like maybe even ace, queen, ace of hearts, hands like that, you're going to like this line because you're simply way ahead of their range and you get some value. Also, in position to be betting quite aggressively here for this 1/3 pot size. So Jake does check call. I would prefer to see a check raise. It's not bad to check call. Check call is a winning play with this hand. It's definitely better than folding, but check raise is certainly preferred. Anyway, Jake does check call, and let's take a river.
Not really the card that Pierre wanted to see, as his 2-pair could be counterfeited a number of different ways, but he's got the best hand. Imagine this is going to go check, check. Don't see Pierre blasting off here.
So you live in Austin now, right? Properly. Okay, how do you like
See Pierre processing what he's up against. Maybe he needs to turn this now into a bluff, but I think he's going to slow down and just see what Jake's playing here early on in the session. Let's see. Taking a lot of time here, so once he starts thinking this long, might indeed fire in a bet here.
I do go to those spots. I would like Terry Box.
Yeah.
That's great. I mean, I know it's like touristy, but I think it's the best one.
Like
I need to go to La Barbecue. That one's really highly rated.
what is it?
La Barbecue.
Oh, okay.
That one's really highly rated.
Today, Junior. All in from Pierre.
Interesting. Rips it all
First time
you can eat here with just 7-5
I ever
off.
landed at Austin. I was like, oh,
The river comes an offsuit 10, and this is actually a pretty interesting spot. In this situation, Jake should actually be doing some leading. A 1/3 pot bet makes a lot of sense here. He's going to have way more 10x than his opponent. If you open to 10, you're likely going to use, if you open to 10 and you use a small flop size, you're likely going to bet the flop, check call the turn. So now you have a lot of trips that your opponent doesn't have. If Pierre has a 10 himself, he's more likely to check back the turn. So in this spot, you now have a new class of value bets, but you're still behind the top value bets your opponent can have, aka flushes. So the solver says 1/3 pot here is pretty good. You use hands like ace, king, king of hearts, and then you also use hands like, for example, trips, and you can occasionally get spicy with some better hands too. Anyway, Jake does decide to check, definitely standard, and if you play no leads here, it's fine. You're not missing out on a lot of value. And now over to Pierre. With a 7-5, he has a slam dunk check. He has showdown value. He beats some high card hands, and if his opponent has a 10, they're going to call. If they have a queen, they're probably going to call too. But Pierre is the third best player from Italy. So it's time. Pierre goes for the overbet, wagering the entire thing. And this is a mistake. It's better to have a bluff with a hand like a straight draw or a value bet with a hand like, trips are better. The reality is in this spot, maybe if you get really deep, the solver will like using the double pair blockers to go for a bluff like this. And when you have the 7 of hearts, one of the cool things is that usually the out of position player, the flushes they trap often have the 7 of hearts. So you have good removal against your opponent having a good hand, and you don't block any of their folds. All those things are good. The problem is you have showdown value. You can just win this by checking. And if you check back, you're going to win some of the time. They can have some high card hands, not that often, but some of the time. It's just more efficient to bluff when you have a hand like, let's just say 9-8 with a heart. Back over to Jake with the ace king. It is a spot where his opponent is very polarized. He's saying he either has kind of a 10 or better, and he has the king of hearts, which does block a bunch of flushes. The problem for Jake here is if Pierre is bluffing, it's going to be with ace x, king x hands or some missed straight draws. So he blocks some of the bluffs, and while he blocks some of the value as well, overall it's way better simply to just have a pair here. But here's the thing about this spot. Jake told me I had to read. Or actually he said, in a meeting, but don't forget I had a ready, bruh. LOL. I think that means read. Or he had a ready. I'm going to go with read.
Jake thinking about it.
First time I ever landed here, I was like, I want to try barbecue. So I just typed in barbecue and I went to, what is it, Terry Black's, right? And it was amazing. And I came here right after, and I was like, have you guys heard of Terry Black's? Like, that spot's awesome. Everyone's like, shut the fuck up. Like, we know what that is.
There's like a little bit of like a people want to be hipster to barbecue. And it's just like you're like, oh, I like Terry Black. It's like cool.
Oh, that's
Mine is a little suspect here, but I don't think Jake's going to be the hero that the chat needs and call off his entire stack with ace high.
My favorite barbecue, and then like some place that like people have been to twice, you know. Dude, we're not mic'd up here. It's gonna get stuck to start off.
Makes the call. Wow. Makes the call. The hero call calls off 7K.
No, what?
Jake is going to buy in for another 10K or more.
Table is stunned. I'm quite stunned. Chat is stunned. All of a sudden, a 20K pot. Pierre thinking that his 2-pair got counterfeited. Imagine turning the. I don't think he was going for value there. I think that was a bluff.
So there you have it. An all-in bluff that was a hand way too good to bluff with that got called by a bluffier bluff to stack them for a 20K pot. And if you want to come on down and play at the lodge, hit up Skull Mike on social media because we got games, guys. We got some games. We got some pots. Good times here in Texas. We got some double straddles. You're going to fit in. You'll be just fine. If you play 1-2 your local room, you're probably able to have a little success here. That's going to do it for me. I will see you guys again soon, aka today at the meetup game over at the lodge. Peace.